The gunshot that shattered the afternoon silence in Carson City, Nevada, wasn't what made Samuel Jefferson's blood run cold in July of 1878. It was the sound of a woman's cry that followed, sharp and afraid, that stopped him dead in his tracks outside the saloon. Samuel had ridden into town 3 days prior with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and the wages he'd earned from 6 months of hard cattle driving. At 26 years old, he'd seen enough of the territory to know when to mind his business and when to act. The cry came again, and he found himself moving toward the commotion before his mind caught up with his boots. Behind the general store, a crowd had gathered in a loose circle. Samuel pushed through, his tall frame and broad shoulders making it easy enough. What he saw made his jaw tighten. A man, portly and red-faced, stood over a young woman who'd fallen to her knees in the dust. Her dress was threadbare, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, and even from where Samuel stood, he could see the bruise forming on her cheek. "I said get up, you worthless thing," the man bellowed, his jowls shaking with rage. "You dropped 3 eggs. 3. That's coming out of your hide." The woman, who couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, struggled to her feet. Her hands were shaking as she tried to gather the broken shells and yolk from the ground, though it was clearly a futile effort. Samuel noticed the way she moved, careful and practiced, like someone accustomed to pain. "Please, Mr. Patterson, it was an accident." "The bag tore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying a melody to it that struck something in Samuel's chest. Patterson raised his hand again, and Samuel moved without thinking. He caught the man's wrist mid-swing, his grip iron hard from years of ranch work. "That's enough," Samuel said, his voice low and steady. Patterson whirled on him, his face going from red to purple. "You got no business here, stranger. This is my property, and I'll do as I please with her." The word property hit Samuel like a physical blow. He looked at the woman again, really looked, and saw the iron band around her ankle, mostly hidden by her skirt but visible now that she'd fallen. An indentured servant, then, or something worse. The practice wasn't legal in Nevada, but Samuel knew well enough that the law and what actually happened were often 2 different things, especially this far from the bigger cities. "Your property," Samuel repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "We're in Nevada. We got laws against that." "She's bound to me by debt," Patterson spat. "Legal contract. Her daddy owed me money before he died, and she's working it off. Been 3 years now, and she's still got 5 more to go if she keeps breaking my merchandise." Samuel's eyes flicked to the woman. She was looking at him now, her eyes a startling green even in the harsh sunlight. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Hope, maybe, or just exhaustion so deep it looked like hope. "How much?" Samuel asked. "What?" Patterson's anger faltered, replaced by confusion. "How much does she owe you? Total?" Patterson's eyes narrowed, calculating. $300, plus interest. Call it 400 even. It was highway robbery, Samuel knew. No debt could have been that high, and even if it was, 3 years of labor should have paid it twice over. But he also knew men like Patterson. They kept their workers in debt through creative accounting, always adding new charges, new reasons why the balance never decreased. $400 was nearly everything Samuel had. 6 months of sleeping on hard ground, eating dust, and nursing cattle through storms and stampedes. It was supposed to be the start of something, maybe a down payment on his own land. He looked at the woman again. A bruise was blooming across her cheekbone like a dark flower. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but only because she'd clasped them together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I'll give you 250, Samuel said. "Cash money right now." The crowd had gone silent. Even Patterson seemed taken aback. "I said 400. And I'm saying $250 is more than fair for a debt that should have been paid off a year ago, and we both know it. You take my offer, or I go have a conversation with Sheriff Morrison about the legality of your arrangement here." It was a bluff. Samuel didn't know if Morrison would care or not. But Patterson didn't know that Samuel didn't know, and the mention of the law made the fat man's eye twitch. 300. Final offer. Samuel considered. 300 would leave him with barely $60 to his name. He'd be back to square one, maybe worse. The woman's green eyes met his, and he saw her lips form a single word, though no sound came out. "Please. Deal," Samuel heard himself say. 20 minutes later, the transaction was complete. Samuel had marched Patterson to the bank, withdrawn his money, and watched as the man signed a document releasing one Delilah Preston from all debts and obligations. The banker, a thin man named Wilcox, witnessed the signature and provided a copy for Samuel's records. Delilah stood to the side throughout, silent and still as a statue. When Patterson had gone, counting his money with greedy fingers, Samuel turned to Delilah. Up close, he could see more signs of her ordeal, scars on her hands from what looked like kitchen burns, a thinness to her frame that spoke of too many missed meals. But her eyes were clear and intelligent, and when she looked at him, he felt that strange pull in his chest again. "You're free to go," he said, holding out the document. "This says you don't owe Patterson anything." "You don't owe me anything either. I'm not looking to trade one master for another." Delilah took the paper with trembling hands. She stared at it for a long moment, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something cruel. When she finally looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Samuel shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "Didn't seem right is all. No person should be treated like property." "What's your name?" "Samuel Jefferson. Friends call me Sam." "Samuel," she repeated like she was tasting the word. "I'm Delilah, Delilah Preston." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "I've got nowhere to go, no family, no money. Patterson made sure I couldn't save anything. I don't even have a change of clothes except what's in his house, and I'd rather die than go back there." Samuel hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd acted on instinct, on the simple knowledge that what he'd witnessed was wrong. Now he was standing in the afternoon heat with a woman who'd just been freed from what amounted to slavery, and he had no more plan than she did. "There's a boarding house on 3rd Street, he said slowly. "Run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. She's fair, and she sometimes has work for women who need it. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. I can take you there, get you set up for a few nights while you figure things out." Delilah looked down at herself, at her ragged dress and broken shoes. "I can work," she said quietly. "I'm good at it too when I'm not being beaten for things that aren't my fault. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden. I learned fast." "I don't doubt it," Samuel said, and he meant it. There was something in the set of her shoulders now, a strength emerging as the shock wore off. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat 2-story building painted white with blue shutters. The proprietor herself was a small Chinese woman in her 50s who'd come west with her husband during the railroad boom and stayed after he'd died in a construction accident. She ran a tight ship, but had a reputation for kindness. Samuel explained the situation as delicately as he could while Delilah stood in the entryway, looking around at the clean floors and simple but well-maintained furniture like she'd stepped into a palace. Mrs. Chen studied Delilah with sharp eyes that saw everything. "You know how to make bread?" she asked. "Yes, madam, 6 different kinds. Chinese dumplings? No, madam, but I could learn." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "Room and board plus $2 a week to start. You work hard, keep your nose clean, we'll see about more later. I need help in the kitchen and with the rooms. We got miners and cowboys coming through all the time. Delilah's face transformed. The hope Samuel had glimpsed earlier bloomed into something radiant. Yes, madam. Thank you, madam. I won't let you down. See that you don't, Mrs. Chen turned to Samuel. You're a good man, Mr. Jefferson. Not many would do what you did today. Samuel felt his ears grow hot. Just doing what's right. Well, right or not, you're welcome to supper tonight if you want. 6 o'clock. Call it a thank you for bringing me good help. That evening, Samuel found himself sitting at Mrs. Chen's long dining table with 5 other boarders, a mix of prospectors and ranch hands passing through Carson City. The food was simple but good, beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread that Delilah had helped make, according to Mrs. Chen's pointed comment. Delilah herself served the meal, moving quietly around the table. She'd washed and changed into a simple brown dress that Mrs. Chen had provided, and with her hair properly pinned and the dust cleaned away, Samuel was struck by how pretty she was. Not in the painted, artificial way of the saloon girls, but naturally, with an honest beauty that came from within. Their eyes met once as she refilled his coffee, and she gave him a small, genuine smile that made his heart do an unexpected flip. After supper, the other boarders drifted off to the saloons or their rooms, but Samuel lingered, helping clear plates despite Mrs. Chen's protests. He found Delilah in the kitchen, her hands in soapy water, washing the dishes. You settling in all right? He asked, picking up a towel to dry. Better than all right, she said. I have a room to myself, a real room with a bed and a pillow and a window with curtains. I haven't had that since before my father died. What happened, if you don't mind my asking? Delilah was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling in the water. He was a blacksmith, a good one, but he took to drinking after my mother passed, and he made some bad choices. Borrowed money from Patterson to cover gambling debts, then got himself kicked by a horse before he could pay it back. I was 19. Patterson showed up the day after we buried him with a contract. Said I could work off the debt or he'd take me to court and I'd end up in jail. I didn't know any better, so I signed. He was lying, Samuel said, anger heating his voice. That's not how debt works, especially not inherited debt. I know that now. Took me about a year to figure it out, but by then I was trapped. He kept adding charges, broke a plate, that's $1, tore a sheet, $2, burned a roast, $5. The debt never got smaller, only bigger. Why didn't you run? Where would I go? He had the sheriff convinced I was legally bound to him, and he said if I ran, he'd report me as a thief and have me hunted down. I believed him. She turned to look at Samuel, her green eyes intense. You saved my life today, you know that, don't you? I just did what was right. No, she said firmly. You did more than that. You gave me my life back. $300. That's a fortune. Money comes and goes, Samuel said, uncomfortable with the gratitude. What's done is done. They worked in silence for a while, falling into an easy rhythm. Samuel found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, noticing small things. The way she hummed softly while she worked. The efficiency of her movements, nothing wasted. The small smile that played at her lips, like she couldn't quite believe her good fortune. What will you do now? She asked eventually. You said you were just passing through. Was thinking about heading south, maybe find ranch work for the winter. Though with what I got left, I might need to find something sooner rather than later. You spent your savings on me. I spent my money on something worthwhile. Don't regret it for a second. Delilah set down the plate she was washing and turned to face him fully. In the lamplight, her skin glowed golden and her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you properly. You don't need to thank me at all. Yes, I do. But I don't have anything to give you except my word, so I'm giving you that. If you ever need anything at all, you come find me. I'll help you however I can." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, something warm and unexpected. "I'll keep that in mind." Over the next week, Samuel found reasons to stay in Carson City. He picked up odd jobs, fixing a fence here, helping move furniture there, anything to earn a few dollars. He told himself it was practical, that he needed to build his funds back up before moving on. He didn't examine too closely why he always seemed to time his return to the boarding house to coincide with Delilah's free hours in the late afternoon. They'd sit on the front porch, where propriety allowed, and talk. Samuel learned that Delilah loved books, but hadn't been able to read anything new in 3 years. He brought her a battered copy of a novel from the general store, and the way her face lit up made the 50 cents feel like the best money he'd ever spent. She learned that Samuel had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had a small farm, but there wasn't enough land for all of them to make a living, so he'd headed west at 18 to seek his fortune. 8 years later, he was still seeking, but he'd found honest work and honest friends along the way, which counted for something. "You ever want to go back?" Delilah asked one evening as they watched the sun paint the mountains gold and purple. "Sometimes. But there's nothing for me there except memories. My folks passed a few years back. Fever took them both within a week of each other. My brothers have their own families now. I'd just be in the way. I'm sorry. Life happens. You keep moving forward or you get stuck." He glanced at her. "What about you? Got any dreams for your future now that it's yours again?" Delilah was quiet for a long moment. "I used to dream about having a home of my own. Nothing fancy, just somewhere that belonged to me, where I could plant a garden and maybe have some chickens. Somewhere safe." She laughed softly, sadly. "Simple dreams. Nothing wrong with simple. Simple is honest." "What are your dreams, Samuel?" No one had asked him that in years. "Land of my own, eventually. Enough to run some cattle, maybe some horses, a place to build something lasting." He hesitated, then added, "Someone to share it with when the time's right." He felt more than saw Delilah look at him. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken. Samuel's heart was beating faster, and he wondered if she could hear it. "Samuel," she said softly. He turned to meet her eyes, and the moment stretched between them like spun gold. He wanted to say something, to name the feeling growing in his chest, but before he could find the words, Mrs. Cheng called from inside that she needed Delilah's help with something. The moment broke. Delilah stood, smoothing her skirt. "I should go." "Yeah," Samuel agreed, though everything in him wanted to ask her to stay. That night, lying in his rented room above the livery, Samuel admitted to himself what he'd been dancing around for days. He was falling for Delilah Preston. Maybe had been since the moment he'd seen her in that dusty street, broken but not beaten. The realization should have scared him. Instead, it felt right, like a piece of a puzzle sliding into place. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The answer came 3 days later in a way Samuel didn't expect. He was replacing a broken axle on a wagon for the blacksmith when Patterson appeared, his face mottled with anger and something that looked like desperation. "You," Patterson spat, jabbing a finger at Samuel. "This is your fault." Samuel straightened slowly, wiping grease from his hands. "I got no quarrel with you, Patterson. Our business was concluded. You ruined me. That girl was worth 5 times what you paid. I had buyers lined up, interested parties. Now I got nothing." The words hit Samuel like ice water. "Buyers? What the hell are you talking about?" Patterson seemed to realize he'd said too much. His eyes darted around, but the blacksmith had conveniently stepped into his shop, and they were alone in the yard. "Doesn't matter now. Point is, you cost me a lot of money and I aim to get it back." You got $300 for a debt that was illegal to begin with. You made out better than you deserved. We'll see about that. I got friends in this town. The law ain't as clear-cut as you might think, and I got a good memory for faces. You best watch yourself, Jefferson." It was an empty threat from a desperate man, but it still made Samuel's gut tighten with worry, not for himself, but for Delilah. After Patterson stormed off, Samuel went straight to Mrs. Chen. He found her in her office, a small room off the kitchen where she kept her accounts. She listened to his story with a grave expression. "Patterson is a snake," she said when he finished. "But he's a snake with some influence. His brother-in-law is on the town council. Nothing that would protect him from serious legal trouble, but enough to make life difficult if he wants to. Will Delilah be safe here? Safe enough. He can't force her back, and if he tries anything on my property, he'll answer to me and my shotgun." Mrs. Chen's expression was fierce. "But you're right to be concerned. Men like Patterson don't like losing. What should I do, Mrs.?" Chen studied him with those sharp eyes. "You care about her." It wasn't a question, but Samuel answered anyway. "Yes, madam, more than I probably should, given I've only known her a couple of weeks. Time doesn't matter when the heart knows what it wants. The question is, what do you plan to do about it?" "I don't know. I'm not exactly in a position to offer much. Got barely $70 to my name and no prospects beyond odd jobs. But you have your health, your skills, and unless I'm mistaken, a good heart. That counts for more than you might think." She paused. "Delilah speaks of you often." Samuel's pulse quickened. She does, with fondness and respect, maybe more." Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "I'm going to be blunt, Mr. Jefferson. That girl has been through hell. If you're developing feelings for her, you need to be sure they're real and you're in it for the right reasons. She deserves someone who will treat her well and stay. I would never hurt her. Intentionally, no. But leaving can hurt just as much as staying and being cruel, so I'll ask you plain. Are you thinking about courting her proper, or are you just passing time before you move on?" The question cut to the heart of what Samuel had been wrestling with. He'd spent 8 years drifting, never putting down roots, always chasing the next opportunity. Could he change that? Did he want to? He thought of Delilah's smile, her laugh when he'd told a particularly bad joke, the way she'd looked at the sunset like it was a painting made just for her, the strength in her that shone through despite everything she'd endured. "I want to stay," he said, and as the words left his mouth, he knew they were true. "I want to build something here, and I want to do it with her if she'll have me." Mrs. Chen nodded, satisfied. "Then you best figure out how to make a living that's more stable than odd jobs. I might be able to help with that." As it turned out, Mrs. Chen had a cousin who ran a freight company and was looking for reliable men to manage deliveries between Carson City and the mining camps in the mountains. The work was steady, the pay was decent, and it would keep Samuel in town rather than roaming. Samuel met with the cousin, a shrewd businessman named Thomas Chen, and was hired on the spot after Mrs. Chen's recommendation. The job would start in a week, which gave Samuel time to prepare and to figure out how to tell Delilah how he felt. He found her in the garden behind the boarding house 2 days later, tending the vegetables in the late afternoon sun. She'd filled out a bit in the week since her freedom, her cheeks had more color, and she moved with an ease that spoke of reduced pain and fear. "Those tomatoes coming in nice," Samuel said as he approached. Delilah turned, her face breaking into a smile that made his stomach flip. "They are, Mrs. Chen says we'll have enough to sell some at the market." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I didn't expect to see you today. I thought you were helping at the livery. Finished early. Thought maybe you'd like to take a walk if you have time." "I do. Let me just wash up." They walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the mountains rose in the distance. The afternoon was warm but not oppressive, and a breeze carried the scent of sage and pine. "I got something to tell you," Samuel said after they'd walked in comfortable silence for a bit. "I took a job with Thomas Chen's freight company. Means I'll be staying in Carson City for the foreseeable future." Delilah stopped walking. When she turned to look at him, her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were bright. "You're staying, if that's all right with you." "Why would it matter if it's all right with me?" This was it. Samuel took a breath, gathering his courage. "Because you're the reason I'm staying, Delilah. I came to this town planning to pass through, but then I met you and everything changed. I know it's only been a few weeks, and I know you've been through a lot and maybe it's too soon. But I can't leave without telling you that I've got feelings for you. Real ones." Delilah's eyes had gone wide. "Samuel, I don't know what to say." Fear clutched at his heart. "You don't have to say anything you don't feel. I just needed you to know. If you want me to keep my distance, I will. But if there's any chance you might feel the same way, I'd like permission to court you proper." For a long moment, Delilah just looked at him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, tremulous but genuine. "You want to court me, more than anything." "I'm not a good prospect, Samuel. I have nothing. No money, no family, no education beyond basic reading and writing. I'm damaged goods, as Patterson liked to remind me." Samuel closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were work-roughened but warm, and they fit in his like they were made to be there. "You listen to me, Delilah Preston. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. You survived 3 years of hell and came out with your kindness and hope intact. You're smart and skilled, and you've got a laugh that makes the whole world seem brighter. Any man would be lucky to have you, and if you'll give me the chance, I'll spend every day proving that I know how lucky I am." Tears were sliding down Delilah's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I was so afraid you'd leave. Every day I waited for you to say you were moving on, and every day you stayed felt like a gift. I've been half in love with you since you caught Patterson's hand, but I was too scared to hope it could be real." "It's real," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you it's real." "Then yes. Yes, you can court me. Yes to all of it." Samuel wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly he ached with it, but they were standing on a public road and propriety mattered, especially for Delilah's reputation. Instead, he squeezed her hands and grinned like a fool. "I'm going to do right by you," he said. "I'm going to build us a life, something solid and good. It might take time, but I'll get us there." "We'll get there," Delilah corrected gently. "Together, together." The word settled over Samuel like a benediction, a promise of all the things he'd been searching for without knowing it. The next few months passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Samuel threw himself into his job with the freight company, proving himself reliable and capable. Thomas Chen, pleased with his work ethic, gave him more responsibilities and better routes. The money wasn't a fortune, but it was steady, and Samuel saved every penny he could. He courted Delilah with all the propriety that Mrs. Chen's watchful eye demanded. Sunday walks after church, carefully chaperoned dinners, conversations on the porch where they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's dreams and fears and favorite things. Samuel learned that Delilah loved the color blue, but had never owned anything in that shade. He bought her a scarf the color of summer sky, and the way she'd blushed and held it to her cheek made him feel 10 feet tall. Delilah learned that Samuel had a sweet tooth and a particular fondness for apple pie. She made him one for his birthday in October, and he declared it the best thing he'd ever tasted, which made her laugh and call him a flatterer. They were happy, building something real and true. But the shadow of Patterson lingered. The man had made several attempts to cause trouble, spreading rumors about Delilah's character, and trying to claim that Samuel had stolen his property. But Mrs. Chen's position in the community and the legal document from the bank protected them. Still, Patterson's presence was a constant reminder that the past wasn't quite finished with them. The confrontation came in late November, when the first snows were dusting the mountains. Samuel was loading freight onto his wagon outside the company warehouse when Patterson appeared with two rough-looking men. One of them, Samuel recognized as a known troublemaker who'd spent time in jail for brawling. "Jefferson," Patterson said, his voice carrying false joviality. "We need to have a conversation about you interfering in my business." Samuel straightened, his hand casually moving to rest on the handle of the knife at his belt. Not a threat, just a reminder. "We got no business, Patterson. That was settled months ago. See, that's where you're wrong. I've been doing some checking, and it turns out that contract I had with the Preston girl's daddy was legitimate after all, which means you bought stolen property and I want it back. It was nonsense, and they both knew it. You signed a release. You took the money. That's the end of it. Maybe I changed my mind. Maybe I want to renegotiate." The two men with Patterson spread out slightly, a flanking maneuver. Samuel recognized the threat for what it was. They weren't here to talk. They were here to intimidate, possibly worse. Renegotiation isn't an option. "You got a legal complaint, take it to the sheriff." Patterson's false smile dropped. "The sheriff doesn't care about the likes of you or that whore you're courting." Red flooded Samuel's vision. He took a step forward and Patterson's men tensed. "You watch your mouth. Or what? You'll fight all three of us. You might be tough, Cowboy, but you're not that tough." Samuel was calculating odds and angles, figuring out if he could get to his rifle in the wagon before things turned violent when a voice cut through the tension. "There's a problem here, gentlemen." Sheriff Morrison had appeared from around the corner of the warehouse, his hand resting on his pistol. He was an older man, grizzled and tough, with a reputation for fairness that had kept him in office for 10 years. Patterson's face went through several interesting color changes. "No problem, Sheriff, just having a friendly conversation." "Didn't look friendly to me." Morrison's eyes flicked to Samuel. "You all right, Jefferson?" "Fine, Sheriff. Mr. Patterson here was just leaving." Morrison looked at Patterson and his hired muscle. "That true? You leaving?" Patterson knew when he was beaten. "Sure, Sheriff, we're going." But as he passed Samuel, he leaned in close enough to whisper, "This ain't over." After they'd gone, Morrison turned to Samuel. "You want to tell me what that was really about?" Samuel explained, keeping it brief and factual. Morrison listened, his expression growing darker. "I knew Patterson was a snake, but I didn't realize he'd slithered this low. That Preston girl really free and clear?" "Yes, sir. Got the paperwork from the bank and everything." "Good, but Jefferson, a word of advice. Men like Patterson don't let things go. You watch yourself and you watch that young lady of yours. He tries anything, you come to me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." "Yes, sir." But Samuel knew that sometimes the law couldn't move fast enough. That night, he told Delilah what had happened, hating the fear that clouded her eyes. "He's not going to stop," she said quietly. They were in Mrs. Chen's parlor, sitting a respectable distance apart on the sofa, but Samuel could feel her trembling. "He hates losing, and he hates me for being the cause of it. He's not going to touch you. I won't let him. Samuel, you can't watch me every moment, and I can't live in fear forever, waiting for him to make his move." She was right, and Samuel hated it. "So what do we do?" Delilah was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, there was steel in her eyes. "We get married." Samuel's heart stuttered. "What? We get married," she repeated, stronger now. "As soon as possible. If I'm your wife, legally bound to you, Patterson loses any claim he might think he has. And more than that, I want to marry you, Samuel. I love you. I've been waiting for you to ask, but if you need more time, I understand. But if you're willing, I'd like to be your wife." Samuel felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. "You love me. Of course I love you. How could I not? You saved me and then you stayed. You've been patient and kind and everything I never thought I'd have. So yes, I love you. If you'll have me, I choose to be yours. Not because I'm bound or obligated, but because I want to be." The emotion in Samuel's chest was so large it felt like it might crack him open. He slid from the sofa to one knee, taking her hands in his. "Delilah Preston, I love you more than I got words for. You're my first thought in the morning and my last at night. I want to build a life with you, a real home where you're safe and happy and never afraid again. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, yes." This time, Samuel didn't care about propriety. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was everything he'd imagined and more. She tasted like hope and home, and when they finally broke apart, both breathless, he felt like he could conquer the world. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Carson City. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with Thomas Chen and Sheriff Morrison. Delilah wore a new dress in that blue she loved, bought with money she'd saved from her wages, and Samuel thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Matthews, spoke about commitment and love through trials. When he got to the vows, Samuel's voice was steady and sure. "I, Samuel Jefferson, take you, Delilah Preston, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and honor you all the days of my life. In good times and bad, in plenty and in want, I will stand by your side. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Delilah's voice shook slightly, but her eyes never left his. "I, Delilah Preston, take you, Samuel Jefferson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and be your partner in all things. You gave me my freedom, and now I freely choose to give you my heart, my life, my future. This I vow before God and these witnesses." The ring Samuel slid onto her finger was simple silver, all he could afford, but Delilah looked at it like it was made of diamonds. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Samuel did thoroughly, to the point where Mrs. Chen had to clear her throat pointedly. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, the small gathering applauded. Mrs. Chen hosted a modest reception at the boarding house, with food and cake and even some music from a fiddle player who lived in one of the rooms. Samuel danced with his wife, marveling at the reality of it. Delilah was his and he was hers, bound together by choice and love. That night, in the small room Samuel had rented in a quiet boarding house on the edge of town, they began their married life together. Samuel had been nervous, worried about rushing things given Delilah's past trauma, but she came to him without fear, trusting him completely. "I love you," he whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "My wife, my Delilah." "I love you," she whispered back. "My husband, my Samuel." They built their life slowly, carefully, like craftsmen working on something precious. Samuel continued his work with the freight company, and his reputation grew. Thomas Chen, impressed by his dedication and integrity, made him a partner in the business after a year. It wasn't a large share, but it came with better pay and a say in decisions. Delilah continued working for Mrs. Chen for a while, but eventually she started taking in sewing and selling baked goods at the market. She had a talent for both, and word spread. Before long, she had more business than she could handle. They saved every penny they could, living frugally but happily. Their room was small, but it was theirs, filled with small treasures. A quilt Delilah had sewn, books they'd collected together, Wildflowers Samuel brought home that Delilah would arrange in a jar on their single table. Patterson tried to cause trouble a few more times, but his influence was waning. The town had seen through his schemes, and a new scandal involving him trying to cheat a widow out of her property had turned public opinion fully against him. Eventually, he left Carson City altogether, moving to parts unknown, and Samuel and Delilah breathed easier. 2 years after their marriage, Samuel came home with news that made Delilah scream with joy. He'd found land, 20 acres just outside town with a creek running through it and a small house that needed work but had good bones. "It's ours," Delilah asked, clutching the deed like it might disappear. "It's ours. I bought it outright with our savings and my share of the freight business. No debt, no mortgage, just ours." They moved in a week later, and Delilah cried when she saw it. The house was small, just 3 rooms, but it had windows that let in light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. The land was rich, perfect for the garden Delilah had always dreamed of. They worked together to fix the place up, painting and repairing. Samuel built Delilah a chicken coop, and she started her flock with 6 hens and a rooster. She planted her garden, rows of vegetables and herbs, and watched them grow with the pride of someone tending something precious. The freight business continued to prosper, and Samuel was gone sometimes for days at a time making deliveries to the mining camps. He hated being away from Delilah, but she understood. They were building something, investing in their future. On one of those trips, 3 years into their marriage, Samuel returned home to find Delilah waiting on the porch, her face glowing with news. "I'm pregnant," she said before he'd even dismounted. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby." Samuel nearly fell off his horse in his haste to get to her. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Delilah asked, though she must have seen the answer written all over his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. You've made me the luckiest man alive." Delilah Jefferson. Their son was born in early spring of 1882, arriving during a rainstorm that turned the world green and fresh. Samuel paced the length of their small house while Mrs. Chen and the doctor attended Delilah, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards. When the baby's cry finally rang out, strong and healthy, Samuel thought his heart might burst. Mrs. Chen brought him in, placed the tiny bundle in his arms, and Samuel looked down at his son with wonder. "He's perfect," he breathed. "He is," Delilah agreed from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at the small face, peaceful in sleep, Samuel knew. "Daniel," he said. "After your father, so part of him lives on in something good." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel Jefferson. It's perfect." Being a father changed Samuel in ways he hadn't expected. He'd thought he understood love, thought what he felt for Delilah was the deepest emotion he could experience. But watching her nurse their son, seeing Daniel's first smile, hearing his first laugh, opened whole new chambers in Samuel's heart. He cut back on the long hauls with the freight company, training others to make the trips while he took over more of the administrative side. It meant being home more, being there for the daily moments. Daniel's first tooth, his first steps, the first time he called Samuel Papa. Delilah flourished as a mother. She was patient and loving, teaching Daniel his letters and numbers, telling him stories, singing songs. The trauma of her past had left scars, yes, but they didn't define her. She'd chosen healing, chosen hope, and it showed in everything she did. The freight company continued to grow, and Samuel's partnership stake increased. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable. They expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms, including a proper parlor. Delilah's garden expanded too, and she started selling preserves and pickles at the market alongside her baked goods. When Daniel was 3, Delilah became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in the winter, a tiny thing with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah after Samuel's mother. Life fell into a rhythm, busy but good. Samuel would sometimes stop in the middle of a workday and just marvel at it all. He had a wife he adored, 2 healthy children, a home, a business. Everything he'd been searching for when he'd drifted west all those years ago, he'd found in Carson City. One evening, when Daniel was 7 and Sarah was 4, the family sat on their porch watching the sunset. Delilah was mending while Sarah played with a doll. Daniel was reading aloud from a school book, showing off his skills. Samuel sat with his arm around Delilah, content. "You ever think about that day?" Delilah asked quietly. "When you bought my freedom?" "Sometimes," Samuel admitted. "It was the best $300 I ever spent. I think about it all the time, about how my life could have gone if you'd just walked past, if you'd minded your own business like everyone else." Samuel tightened his arm around her. "I couldn't. Not when I saw you. It was like something in me just knew." "Knew what?" "That you were important. That you were mine to protect." He paused. "I fell in love with you that day, I think. Didn't realize it for a while, but looking back, it started right then." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me everything, Samuel. My freedom, my life, my family. I don't know how to ever repay that. You already have. Every day I wake up next to you is payment enough." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, you gave me everything too, a home, a purpose, a family. We saved each other." "Mama, Papa, look." Sarah called, pointing at the sky where the sunset had painted the clouds in shades of pink and gold. "It's so pretty." "It is, sweetheart," Delilah agreed, smiling. Daniel closed his book and came to squeeze between his parents on the bench. "Tell us the story again," he said, "about how you met." It was a familiar request. Samuel and Delilah exchanged a glance and she nodded for him to start. "Well," Samuel began, "it was a hot day in July and I heard a woman cry out." As he told the story, editing it to be appropriate for young ears, Samuel watched his family. Daniel listened with rapt attention despite having heard it dozens of times. Sarah had abandoned her doll to climb into Delilah's lap. Delilah herself was smiling, her eyes distant as she remembered. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their life. The freight company expanded to include routes throughout Nevada and into California. Samuel took on 2 more partners, good men he trusted, which allowed him to step back even further and focus on his family. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Samuel and Delilah saved to send him to a good school in Sacramento when he was 14. And though they missed him terribly during the school year, they were proud of his accomplishments. Sarah was her mother's daughter, practical and kind with a gift for growing things. The garden that had started as Delilah's hobby became Sarah's passion. By the time she was 12, she was managing it almost entirely on her own, and her preserves won ribbons at the county fair. In 1892, when Samuel was 40 and Delilah was 36, they welcomed a surprise: another son. They named him James, and his arrival brought fresh joy to the household. Daniel came home from school to meet his new brother, and Sarah appointed herself his primary caretaker, much to Delilah's amusement. Mrs. Chen, now elderly and retired from running the boarding house, was a frequent visitor. She doted on the children and often told them they were the result of their parents' great love story. "Your papa saw your mama and knew she needed help," she'd say. "And she was brave enough to accept it and smart enough to love him back." As James grew, Samuel sometimes caught glimpses of his younger self in his son's adventurous spirit. James was always exploring, always asking questions, always ready for the next thing. It made Samuel's heart ache with nostalgia for his own youth while filling him with hope for James's future. The years had been kind to Samuel and Delilah in most ways. They'd weathered financial scares and illnesses, hard winters and dry summers, but they'd done it together. The love between them had only deepened, tempered by time and trials into something unbreakable. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Delilah back to Carson City, to the spot behind the old general store where they'd first met. The store was under different ownership now, and the area had changed, but the memories were still vivid. "You remember being scared?" Samuel asked, holding her hand. "Terrified," Delilah admitted. "I thought maybe you were worse than Patterson, that I jumped from one fire into another. But then you gave me that paper, told me I was free to go, and I knew you were different. I was so angry that day. Angry at Patterson, angry at a world that would let something like that happen. But then I saw your eyes and the anger became something else. Determination, I guess, to make it right. You did make it right. You made everything right." Delilah reached up to cup his face, her hands showing the marks of 20 years of hard work but still gentle. "I love you, Samuel Jefferson, more now than even on the day I married you. I love you too. You're my everything, Delilah, my whole world." They kissed there in the place where their story had started. Two middle-aged people with silver threading their hair and laugh lines around their eyes, still as in love as two young people courting. The next decade brought more changes. Daniel finished school and decided to become a teacher, a choice that made both his parents swell with pride. He married a sweet girl named Emma, and they settled in Sacramento, giving Samuel and Delilah their first grandchildren, twin girls born in 1898. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son, a good young man named Robert who treated her like she hung the moon. They built a house on part of Samuel and Delilah's land, keeping the family close. Sarah continued her gardening and started a small business selling seeds and plant starts. James, true to his adventurous nature, joined the cavalry at 18. Samuel worried, but Delilah reminded him that young men needed to find their own paths. James wrote faithfully, and his letters were full of excitement about the places he'd seen and things he'd done. Samuel eventually sold his share of the freight company, using the money to expand the ranch and set up trust funds for the grandchildren. He was 60 when he fully retired, content to spend his days working the land and spoiling his growing brood of grandchildren. Delilah, at 56, was still beautiful to Samuel, still the woman who'd captured his heart in a dusty street all those years ago. They'd sit on their porch in the evenings, now expanded and furnished with comfortable chairs, and watch the sun set over land that belonged to them and their children. "You have any regrets?" Delilah asked one evening. Samuel thought about it seriously. There were things he might have done differently, business opportunities he'd passed on, places he'd never seen. But regrets? Not a one, he said honestly. My life turned out better than I ever could have planned. What about you? Same, Delilah said softly. Sometimes I think about those 3 years with Patterson, and I hate that they happened. But if they hadn't, I wouldn't have been in that street that day. I wouldn't have met you, so I can't regret even that because it led me here. Everything led us here, Samuel agreed. Every choice, every step, all worth it. In 1905, Samuel and Delilah celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Daniel and Emma brought their twins, now young ladies of 7. Sarah and Robert came with their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Even James made it home on leave, bringing with him a young woman named Catherine whom he proudly introduced as his fiancée. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running and adults talking. Samuel stood in the middle of it all, Delilah at his side, and felt complete. "We did good," Delilah whispered, squeezing his hand. "We did better than good. We did perfect." That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Samuel and Delilah sat on their porch one more time. The Nevada sky was brilliant with stars, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. "When I was in Patterson's house," Delilah said quietly, "I used to look at the stars and dream of freedom. I imagined what it might feel like to not be afraid, to not be owned. I could picture freedom, but I couldn't picture happiness. I didn't think I deserved it. And now I know different. You taught me that I deserved love and kindness. You showed me what happiness looked like, and then you gave it to me every day for 30 years. She turned to look at him, her green eyes still bright despite the years. "Thank you, Samuel, for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. "It was my privilege. From that first moment to this one and every moment to come, loving you has been the greatest honor of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars. Their children slept under their roof or close by. Their grandchildren were safe and loved. The land they'd worked so hard for stretched out around them, a legacy for the future. Samuel thought back to that young cowboy who'd ridden into Carson City with nothing but hope and determination. He'd been searching for something without knowing what. He'd found it in the most unexpected way, in a woman's cry for help and a moment of decision that had changed everything. "I'd do it again," he said suddenly. "All of it, exactly the same. I'd spend every penny to free you, and I'd court you, and I'd marry you, and I'd build this life with you all over again." Delilah smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart 3 decades ago. "Me too. I'd choose you every time. That day in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, when I told you I'd help you however I could, I meant it. But I never imagined the help would go both ways. I never imagined we'd help each other build something this beautiful. We're a good team, the best team." As the years continued, Samuel and Delilah settled into the comfortable rhythm of older age. Their bodies weren't what they used to be, aches and pains that came with time making themselves known, but their spirits remained strong. They took daily walks around their property, slower now but no less enjoyable. They tended the garden together, Delilah directing while Samuel did the heavier work. James married his Catherine and gave them 2 more grandchildren. The family gathered for holidays and birthdays, filling the house with multiple generations. Samuel would sit back and watch them all, amazed that this vast, loving family had grown from that single moment of decision in a dusty street. Mrs. Chen passed away in 1908 at the age of 83, surrounded by people who loved her. At her funeral, Delilah spoke about how Mrs. Chen had given her a chance when she had nothing, had trusted her and helped her. "She was my friend when I desperately needed one," Delilah said, her voice breaking. "She helped me believe I deserved good things." Samuel held his wife as she grieved, remembering the sharp-eyed woman who'd seen through his protests to the love beneath, and helped him figure out how to court Delilah properly. In 1912, Samuel turned 60. His hair was fully silver now, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still sharp, and his love for Delilah still burned bright. They celebrated quietly, just the 2 of them and their children and grandchildren. Daniel, now a headmaster at his school, gave a toast. "To my father, who taught me that real strength is in kindness and real courage is in standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. And to my mother, who showed me that surviving isn't the same as living, and that choosing love is the bravest thing anyone can do." Sarah added her own toast. "To the love story that started our family, may we all be lucky enough to find what you 2 have." James, looking handsome in his cavalry uniform, raised his glass. To the man who showed me what it means to be a husband and father, I can only hope to do half as well. When it was his turn to speak, Samuel looked around at all the faces, these people who existed because he'd decided to help a stranger 34 years ago. "I was just a drifter with no prospects when I came to Carson City," he said. "Your mama changed all that. She gave my life meaning and purpose. Everything good in my life started the day I met her. So here's to Delilah, the strongest woman I know and the love of my life." Delilah was crying, and Sarah moved to comfort her, but Delilah waved her off with a watery laugh. "These are happy tears," she insisted. "The happiest." That night in the bed they'd shared for over 3 decades, Delilah curled against Samuel's side. "We're getting old," she observed. "That we are. I don't mind it, though. Getting old means we get to have all these years together." "Some people don't get that." "We're blessed," Samuel agreed. "More than I ever deserved." "Don't say that. You deserve every good thing." Delilah was quiet for a moment. "Samuel, promise me something, anything. When I'm gone, don't spend too long grieving. Remember me happy. Remember us happy, and know that I loved you with everything I had." "Delilah, don't talk like that. We have to talk about it sometime. We're not young anymore." She reached up to touch his face. "I just want you to know that if I could go back and choose any life, any path, I'd choose this one. I'd choose you, every single time." Samuel's eyes burned with tears. "Same here, you're my everything. Always have been, always will be." They fell asleep holding each other as they had for over 30 years. Two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The years rolled on, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends to age and illness. They celebrated as their grandchildren grew and married and started families of their own, making them great-grandparents. The world changed around them, new inventions and ideas transforming the West they'd known, but some things remained constant. Samuel and Delilah's love was one of those constants. In the spring of 1920, as Samuel approached his 68th birthday and Delilah her 64th, they took a trip back to where it all started. Carson City had grown and modernized, barely recognizable from the frontier town they'd known. But the mountains were still there, eternal and unchanging. They visited the site where the old general store had been, now replaced by a modern building. They walked past Mrs. Chen's boarding house, still standing but under new ownership. They saw the church where they'd married, the bank where Samuel had withdrawn his money, the street where he'd first heard Delilah cry out. "It all looks so different," Delilah said. "But we're still the same," Samuel replied. "Still us, still together." They found a bench in the town square and sat, watching people hurry past on their business. So many of them young with their whole lives ahead of them, unaware of how one moment, one choice, could change everything. "If you could go back and talk to the girl I was," Delilah said thoughtfully, "what would you tell her?" Samuel considered. "I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, that the hard times won't last forever, that happiness is coming more than she can imagine." He smiled. "What would you tell the young cowboy I was?" "I'd tell him thank you. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for caring about a stranger. Thank you for changing my life and then staying to build a new one with me." Delilah leaned against him. "And I'd tell him that the best decision he'll ever make is coming up, and to trust his heart." They sat there for a long time, two old people reflecting on a life well lived, built on a foundation of sacrifice and choice and love that had only grown stronger with time. The last decade of their lives together was gentle. Samuel's health began to fail, his heart not as strong as it once was. Delilah developed arthritis that made her hands ache, but she refused to stop her gardening, even when her children begged her to rest. They spent most of their time at home, surrounded by family. Their children had all settled nearby, unable to stray far from the people who'd given them such a strong foundation of love. The great-grandchildren would visit, climbing on Samuel's lap to hear stories or helping Delilah in the garden. On quiet evenings, Samuel and Delilah would still sit on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. They didn't need to talk much anymore. After so many years together, words were often unnecessary. They could communicate in glances and touches, in the simple comfort of presence. "Do you remember the first time we sat on a porch together?" Delilah asked one evening, at Mrs. Chen's. "You just agreed to let me court you. I was so nervous. I kept thinking you'd change your mind, that you'd realize I wasn't worth the trouble. Never once thought that. Not for a single second. I know that now, but then I was still learning to believe in good things." She squeezed his hand. "You taught me to believe, Samuel, in myself, in the future, in love. You taught me what it means to be truly brave. Taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person." They sat in companionable silence, the evening air sweet with the scent of Delilah's roses. The land around them was peaceful, productive, a testament to decades of hard work and care. In the distance, they could see lights from Sarah's house, where their grandchildren were probably getting ready for bed. "We did good, didn't we?" Delilah said softly. "We did perfect." Samuel passed away in his sleep in the early spring of 1928, 3 months shy of his 76th birthday. Delilah was beside him, as she had been for 46 years of marriage. He went peacefully, simply failing to wake up one morning, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of hard work and hard love. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Carson City and the surrounding territory. Daniel spoke of his father's integrity and kindness. Sarah talked about his patience and wisdom. James, now retired from the cavalry and managing part of the family ranch, remembered his sense of adventure and willingness to take risks for what mattered. But it was Delilah's words that struck everyone most deeply. She stood at the front of the church, straight-backed despite her grief, and told the story one more time. The story of a young cowboy who'd heard a cry for help and decided to act, who'd spent everything he had to free a stranger, who'd given her not just freedom but a future. "Samuel Jefferson saved my life," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "But more than that, he gave me a reason to live. He showed me what love looks like, how it acts, what it costs. He chose me every day for 46 years, and I chose him right back. We built something beautiful together, and that beauty lives on in our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's Samuel's legacy, not just the life he gave me, but all the lives that came from that choice." She lived for another 5 years without him, surrounded by family who loved her fiercely. She tended her garden, taught her great-grandchildren to bake, and told stories about their grandfather until he lived again in their imaginations. On quiet evenings, her children would find her on the porch, sitting in the chair next to Samuel's empty one, talking to him as if he were still there. Maybe he was, in the ways that mattered. Delilah passed away peacefully in her sleep in June of 1933 at the age of 77. She was buried next to Samuel in the family plot on their land, under a spreading oak tree they'd planted together decades before. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple: "Samuel and Delilah Jefferson. He saved her, she chose him, they loved each other. Together always." Their children divided the land among themselves, but kept the house as it was, a monument to the love story that had started their family. Sarah's daughter eventually moved in, maintaining the property and the garden, keeping alive the legacy of hard work and deep love. The story of Samuel and Delilah became family legend, passed down through the generations, about how a cowboy with a good heart had seen injustice and acted, how he'd spent his fortune on a stranger's freedom, how that stranger had thanked him by choosing to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, about how that choice had led to a marriage that lasted 46 years, produced 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 23 great-grandchildren at the time of Delilah's death. About how a single moment of courage and compassion had created a legacy that would ripple forward through time. Years later, Sarah's daughter found a letter tucked into one of Delilah's old books. It was written in Samuel's careful hand, though the date suggested it had been penned not long before his death. "My Delilah," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm gone and I'm sorry for leaving you. But I'm not sorry for anything else. Buying your freedom was the easiest decision I ever made. It wasn't sacrifice, it was privilege. Marrying you, building our life together, loving you every day, that was all privilege too. You say I saved you, but the truth is we saved each other. I was lost before I found you, just drifting without purpose. You gave me a reason to plant roots, to build something lasting. You gave me a home, not in the sense of a place, but in the sense of belonging. My heart belonged with you from the moment I saw you, and it will belong to you forever, even when we're both dust. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for the best 46 years a man could ask for. Until we meet again, I remain, as always, yours, Samuel." The letter was added to the family archives, one more piece of the story. One more testament to a love that had started in the dust of a Nevada street and had endured everything life could throw at it. The Jefferson family continued to grow and thrive, spreading across the country, but always coming back to that original homestead, that plot of land where Samuel and Delilah had built their dream. They'd walk the property and hear stories about the garden Delilah had loved, the porch where Samuel and Delilah had spent countless evenings, the oak tree under which they both now rested. And always, they'd hear the story of how it all began. About the cowboy who bought a woman's freedom and the woman who thanked him by choosing to stay. About how that choice had changed everything, had created a family, had proven that love could heal even the deepest wounds and build something beautiful from the ashes of trauma. It was a story about courage and kindness, about seeing injustice and refusing to walk past, about how one person's decision to do the right thing, even when it cost everything, could ripple out through time and space and create something far bigger than themselves. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple and true, the kind of love that chose and kept choosing, the kind that saw someone at their lowest and said, "I'll help you rise," the kind that asked nothing in return but was given everything anyway. Samuel and Delilah's story became legend, but it was rooted in truth, in the reality of 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built something that would outlast them both. They'd loved deeply and well, and that love had created a legacy that would continue long after the Nevada dust had claimed them both. In the end, that was the real miracle. Not that Samuel had freed Delilah from bondage, though that was remarkable enough. Not even that she'd chosen to stay with him, building a life from nothing. The miracle was that their love had endured. Through poverty and plenty, sickness and health, joy and sorrow, they'd held fast to each other and to the promises they'd made. They'd proved that freedom and choice and love were the most powerful forces in the world. That a single act of kindness could change lives. That choosing to love someone, day after day, year after year, was the truest form of heroism. The story of Samuel Jefferson and Delilah Preston, cowboy and freedwoman, husband and wife, lovers, and best friends, echoed through the generations. A reminder that the best love stories weren't the ones that came easy, but the ones that were fought for, chosen, built brick by brick into something solid and lasting. And in the hearts of their descendants, in the land they'd worked together, in the love that still lingered around that old homestead, Samuel and Delilah lived on, together always, just as the headstone promised. Just as they'd chosen that day when a cowboy bought freedom and a woman decided to stay. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived and a love well earned. And that, in the end, was all anyone could ask for.